Welcome to Just in Stride, Ray. Thanks so much for taking the time.
It's great to be here, brother. Stoked.
Yeah. Yeah, not our first conversation, but definitely the first one on this show. So I'm excited to introduce you to, our new listeners and can't wait to kind of hear what you've been up to.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, it's great to be on here and congrats on the new format, the new podcast. It's exciting.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, and I'm stoked to kind of get things going here. Um So, what's new with you, Ray? Like, I know, you're always up to something. You're like a great Canadian explorer, and but it's not always been that way. But what have you been up to lately?
What have I been up to lately? It's kind of an open-ended and loaded question at the same time. I'm training. Where I am exactly in this moment. I'm training like crazy for what it is that I'm planning to do next. I'm trying to increase my mileage, my daily trail running mileage, mountain biking, starting to put in bigger days and trying to find that work life balance with family, my daughters who are competitive athletes as well in their own sports and but be able to put in the time that I need to do the things that I want to do. But that being said, the primary focus for me right now is to become as healthy as I can be um, right now as I recover from essentially what was 6 months of chemotherapy and monoclonal therapy for a rare form of lymphoma, which is a blood cancer. So I'm sort of coming off of that now. I've been 7 weeks, about 7 weeks since my last and final chemotherapy rounds, and I'm feeling fantastic. As a matter of fact, I feel better now than I did the last 2 years while I was still doing projects and getting after it in, hottest and coldest places on earth and feeling like garbage, not realizing how much of garbage I felt like, but now I'm feeling like I used to feel. I'm starting to feel like I used to feel, right? I'm getting my health back, which is an amazing thing to feel, you know?
So, yeah, and it's great that you're kind of getting back there. You mentioned that you feel better than you did before. Were there warning signs for this? It's a rare form of cancer, like you're saying. How did you identify that? What was the
Yeah, it's
breaking point?
that's a great question. So I was training last year. I'd come back from Ellesmere Island and even backing up before that. So longer than a year ago, I started noticing after having COVID a few times that I wasn't recovering well after workouts. Um I just wasn't able to prepare myself for things that I do like I normally could. And as you know, and many of your listeners would not know unless they've followed my adventures before, to this point, I've covered close to 20,000 kilometers of running, trekking, skiing across literally every large desert on the planet, less one, the Simpson in Australia, but every other desert, including the Sahara, 7,000 kilometers. Um, I have crossed many of the coldest regions on the planet, unsupported Arctic expeditions. I've been to the South Pole, I've crossed Siberia, Kamchatka, the Canadian Arctic numerous times, numerous different expeditions. So I'm used to adversity and knowing my body and knowing when things are going well and when they're not. And I'd come back. So I had COVID a few times, trying to prepare for things. Was up on Ellesmere, came back, was preparing to go to Death Valley last summer, and I absolutely could not recover from workouts. Like, I mean, literally could run one day and not run the next. Not only that, I was finding that I needed to nap frequently during the days. And it was a slow degradation, dude. Like, I mean, as you know, I used to smoke a pack a day, 2 packs a day, drink heavy, all this stuff before I got into ultra running and adventure sports and all this sort of thing. Um, in those days, if I tried running up a set of stairs, I'd be completely winded in my prior life. And I would think, well, it's normal because I'm running upstairs and I'm winded. Well, it wasn't normal, right? And I didn't realize until after when I changed my life and I started running and doing these things, all of a sudden I'm bounding upstairs and I'm like, oh, wait a sec. I felt like shit for the last 30 years of my life, right? And all of a sudden I feel good. So it was kind of the same thing with this. This thing insidiously came on and I slowly depreciated to a point where my wife was like, "You need to get blood work. Like, there's something wrong with you." And one thing led to another, and they determined that I have a lymphoma, which is a common blood cancer, but I had a rare form of that lymphoma. And so my blood proteins were very, very high, and I was anemic. And so it was affecting everything. So I started chemotherapy and monoclonal therapy in October.
Okay. Yeah, so it's really having to know your body, it's like you say, you go through all these adventures and expeditions, and you're really in tune with everything. So that sense of like, this is not normal. This is definitely something different than what I'm used to. Like, how do we get to the bottom of this? Like, so what was like the diagnosis, and then what did that do to you personally? Like, is it a super, like, it's rare, but is it threatening, and like, how do you fight that?
So if I go back in time, 2004 when I transitioned. So, I told you, pack a day smoker, unhealthy guy, changed my life. Then I start getting into the outdoors, and my brother, who got me into the outdoors, wicked ice climber and mountain biker and all that. I started out in mountain biking, was racing mountain bikes competitively, got in really, really good shape over a few years, racing in some pretty big international races and doing well. Discovered ultra running, started racing in ultras, and became a competitive ultra runner. And the types of races that I liked were the ones that would take me to the furthest places away. And just the whole aspect of being in these remote and far away places, and an appreciation of these places that I was learning about because running was teaching me so much about the world, but about myself. Being in a race in Niger it was a 200-mile race nonstop in 2004, and being completely beat down. Like, I would go into these things and I would just give it everything that I had because I kind of knew what I was doing, but also not, I didn't know what I was doing. So I would just go as hard as I could. And I remember I was having a really good race. I was like running top three, and I was alone in the middle of the desert, feeling like a bag of nuts and bolts. I was just a mess. But I remember looking up at the sky and thinking to myself, wow, there's literally nowhere else on the planet I'd rather be in this exact moment, even though I feel so horrible right now. What a gift it is to be out here. So, fast forward, when I'm doing these things, all these expeditions, all these years later, all these things that I learned about myself through the process, I learned that listening to ourselves, knowing where we are, without sounding too corny here, in space and time, and appreciating where we are was critical to me. And when I received that diagnosis and they said, well, listen, this is what you have, it wasn't like this sense of, and by the way, listen, this is what you have, and there is no cure. We're gonna get you really healthy, and you'll be back to normal or better than normal for the next 2 to 5 years on average, and you probably have to do chemotherapy again. But I was like, hey, I like those odds, and now I have a diagnosis and I know what I'm up against, right? So it was like sort of that same feeling. You know what? I'm in this office, I'm getting this diagnosis, this is the place that I am in my life right now. This is where I am, and I need to deal with it, and I can either, you know, go into hibernation for 6 months during this process, or I can continue to live and embrace where I am right now, and it's gonna suck in a lot of ways, but hey. And so that's what I did. I know that's a really long answer for your question.
No,
I
yeah, no, but it's like,
apologize.
it's what I love about it is that you use all those experiences to then take on a new challenge. That's your health, and it's a little bit different, but the mindset is the same. How you tackle those things and how you approach them, and you can't dwell on it. You got to kind of move forward in the best way you can, and that's, I'm sure you face that.
Well, Justin, you know as well as anyone what it's like to run an ultra, and you run the ultra. Let's say it's 100 miles or 100K, whatever it is. You get to the end of the race, and you're like, I am never doing that again. But then somehow you get back into it again, and you will yourself, and you start getting excited. And then you're like, I'm totally stoked about this next race I'm going to do. Right. And expeditions are kind of that way too. Like, I'll go away, I'm gone 20, 30, 40 days, whatever, doing one of these things that I'm doing. And I'm so beat down physically at the end, and I think to myself, "Oof, maybe that's the last one." And then a month later, I'm planning and training for the next. When I went into this thing and I knew what the chemotherapy plan was gonna be, and I had amazing doctors, Um, I figured out very quickly that I was gonna have one really bad week. So I basically what would happen was I was at monoclonal therapy and chemotherapy. It would be 2 days, and then I would have basically almost 25 days off in between sessions. So in that 25-day period, post chemo, I'd have a week where I felt like garbage, a week where I was kinda starting like a half a week to a week where I was starting to feel better, and then in that mishmash of time, I'd have about a week and a half where I felt decent, and I committed during every one of those months, those chemo months, that I would do something to keep me motivated, to keep me as healthy as I could possibly be, force myself to get out of bed and train, even when I didn't feel like it, eat the foods I needed to eat, not eat garbage, not stay emotionally and mentally strong so that I would roll into the next sessions of treatments feeling like I gave it everything I could. So each month was like a challenge, like one of your ultra marathons that you would do. And the goal was be as healthy and fit as I can. I use those goals each month, you know, guiding clients in the Atacama Desert or um, heading with my buddies from Norda, Nick from Norda, and going to the running show in Austin, or um, going with my youngest daughter to Death Valley to do some scouting for some upcoming projects, or going on my own Arctic expedition in February. Right, every month I gave myself something to focus on, and I learned that from expeditions. You
Yeah,
know.
so cool. Yeah. Does it change your perspective or outlook moving forward, or do you kind of just jump back on your plan for what expeditions look like over the next few years, like you
Yeah,
normally
that
would?
that's a great question. I mean, does it change my outlook? Um, my sister-in-law and I were talking about this. She went through breast cancer and she said, it's like it's not there's no like it's not really a journey. And I said, yeah, this is just something that was in my life. It was like, any of the other, it was a period of adversity, right? But I think what it taught me is that for certain, you can have many things in your life, but your health is the number one most important thing that you can own. Do you know what I mean? To a certain extent. And no matter how healthy I was and, my training and all that stuff, bad things can still happen. But you may as well give it everything you got to be as healthy as you can possibly be, so that life can be as awesome as possible, right? Because you have one kick at the can, and that's pretty much it. And so I've always believed since I changed my life and since I went through, the transition of the transformation in life of being an unhealthy guy to a healthy guy, that if you can find happiness and passion in your life, then you've won the lottery.
Mhm.
Right. And so I wasn't willing to wither with this, but instead grow from it and take whatever, the hard days of what I've just experienced, but also the really good days and push those forward into what I do next.
Yeah, and I'm sure a sense of gratitude comes with that too. Like every day that after that, where you got through it, and now you can kind of enjoy all the things that you love to do, which is tons and tons of exciting and fun things, and spend time with your family and all that. What I
Yeah, for
see you
sure.
doing with your daughter too is amazing, and she's kind of following in dad's footsteps, like doing all these
Yeah,
active things.
and I have 2 daughters, and they're both better Nordic skiers than me. They're both they're better trail runners, they're better at everything. And, that's such a great thing for me. I mean, that's really where my passion is, in doing things with my family. I mean, really, truly. Um, but, as you know, because you and I have chatted many times before, I do a bunch of things. I have my foundation, Impossible to Possible, where I take young people on expeditions around the world. Pre-pandemic, we were doing 2 expeditions a year. Now we're getting right back in it. We've done one since in the middle of the pandemic, when it was kind of like there was like this little lull for a while and people weren't sure. We did a mini trip. Now we're getting another huge youth-based expedition going to the Atacama Desert this year. Super excited about that. Been communicating with the youth ambassadors that are going to be going on that expedition. I also have my guiding company, Capic One. So I've got some amazing clients going to amazing places this year. My own expeditions and projects. I have a lot that I want to do. Following my daughters as they compete. in their own sports. They're both competitive spring kayakers and spring canoers, and in the summer and in the winter, competitive Nordic skiers. So I've got a lot I want to live for and be healthy for. You know what I'm saying? And
Mhm.
be able to crank it back up. And I'll be honest with you, on some of my training runs these days, I feel, as I said to you in the beginning, better than I have in the last 2 years. You
Yeah, and
know?
that's gotta feel amazing, right? Like, that's
Oh
gotta
yeah, I
be
feel it's legit, dude. It's legit because it's like you just flicked a switch, right? Like I felt like garbage after my last and final chemo. And I thought, well, maybe I won't get out of this hole. And then each run subsequent to that, I'm like, wow, I forgot what it was like to have gears. Like it's the things that we take for granted. I used to be able to run up hills. I got a bunch of buddies who are really fast runners, and I would go out on trails with them and we'd work each other on the trails. And I remember being able to run up climbs, really technical climbs, and you get to the top and be able to know how hard can I push the top of this hill so that I can recover on the way down to race my buddies up the next part. Well, for 2 years, I forgot that I kinda lost that. And you just get used to not having that anymore. Well, the
Mhm.
other day, I'm out trail running with one of my fast buddies, and I'm like, "Hey, wait a sec. I can push a little harder. It's not monotone." You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's
So,
like yeah, you try it's like you get those reminders of what it's like to try and gain fitness again when you're coming off of maybe being at, peak performance. You know what peak performance feels like for so many years.
yes.
It's kinda like becoming a beginner again in a sense.
Yes. It's the craziest thing to lose. It's like, losing your sense of taste. And then living like that for a long time, and then just assuming all food is bland, and then one day it just comes back,
Yeah.
right? And you bite into chocolate, and you taste it, and you're like, "Shit, that's good," you know? So right?
Yeah. What was there a breakthrough like for you, like as you're coming back to getting your fitness? Is there something you're doing differently to kind of regain that fitness, or is it kind of using old tricks to kind of get yourself back to that
Well,
point?
interesting question, thank you for asking it. Over the years ago, before we ran across the Sahara on the expedition, I had a coaching business, and I was coaching up to 50 runners a month on average. And I was always learning. I was in that industry, right? My brother and sister-in-law are in the health and wellness industry. They're both functional strength coaches. And and they work with a lot of really interesting folks, like NHL hockey players, for example, that are injured or people coming back from injuries. And so I learned a lot about physiology and running and all that in those days. And you learn from running and communicating with your clients and all that stuff about their races as they're going through some years and years and years of this. And then one day, while I transitioned from racing ultras to doing expeditions, that were longer and sometimes in more adverse conditions, crossing deserts in the middle of summer, for example, or Arctic expeditions in the middle of winter. I realized that my training had to be unconventional in order to prepare me for, the hottest places on earth, for example. So, and meager resources of food in the Arctic, only bringing what I need, that sort of thing. So, I, in my training post chemo, decided that I would follow some of those more unconventional elements of training and start applying them to really shake things up. Whenever you change things radically in your training program as an ultra runner or a runner, you cause a physiological response. So the longer you've been running and doing things, the greater the dramatic shift in your training needs to be to incite a physiological response, an adaptive process. So I'm doing stuff that I wasn't necessarily doing before, but some of the things that like I give Elliot Cardin or other myself, I'm coaching a handful of friends right now just for kicks because I'm having fun with it. And and I love these superstar athletes like Elliot. I mean, it's ridiculous how fast that guy. I mean, he'll send me his kilometer repeats. I don't know if he's comfortable with me talking about this stuff, but I mean, he's laying
Oops.
down in the 2:30s, on his
Mhm,
kilometer repeats. It's ridiculous. I mean,
mhm.
if I'm riding my mountain bike, I suppose I could keep up. But at any rate, I apply some of the stuff that I'm doing, the proprioceptive stuff in running or the more mindful stuff in trail running, getting smooth, getting really fast, using less effort to move quickly down the trails, nose breathing, all these different elements. So yes, I'm shaking it up and trying to keep it different.
Yeah, then that's a challenge, when you've been training for so long. Sometimes, you fall into this lull of the same all the time. And I like what you said there, like really implementing some different things to really get your body to kind of get uncomfortable, outside of the comfort zone. I think is a
You know,
really good thing.
we as runners, and many of your listeners will sort of recognize this in themselves, is that we get comfortable doing something that we really like, right? And then what we do is we try to repeat more and more of the things that we really like, rather than occasionally doing the things that we need to do that we may not like as much, right? But those create those opportunities for the body to grow.
Hmm.
Like strength training, there's a lot of people that just do not like to be in the gym strength training. They hate it. But, you know, you do a strength training program, balancing out with some plyo and some moves like that, your trail running, the difference in your trail running, the capacity will be extraordinary. Your agility improves so much. Or doing stuff like nose breathing runs where you're, oxygenating your body, improving your capillarization, all of these things. You put the hard time and you put the hard work in, and you get out on those long runs on the weekend when you're hammering and you're breathing normally and you're sucking in that oxygen where you're more efficient then, right?
Yeah.
You know,
And how much of that are you passing on to your little ones? They're
well,
rocking
they
it.
both, yeah, they both have they have amazing coaches, right? So they're part of the ski program at Chelsea Nordic, and they have amazing coaches there. And in the winter, and my oldest is on the Quebec team for sprint kayak, so they have amazing coaches in both sports. Um, the thing about it that I find so fascinating about them is they both do biathlon, and they kind of figured out at a young age how to shoot between, your heartbeats. So getting their heart rates to drop low enough when they get down into the shooting area that they can shoot and then get back up again and then ski once they hit all the targets, right? So it's really interesting, and I think that a huge part of that is because they're cardiovascularly fit as well because they've been trail running since they were babies, right?
Mhm.
With us, with my wife and I. So
Yeah,
passing on, I
yeah,
think I'm learning more than I'm passing on, you know?
from them.
Yeah, exactly, from them.
That's interesting. Yeah, and I'm sure, like, you know, they don't always want to hear from their dad, so I guess it's good that
Yeah, it's totally true.
they have coaches.
Yeah.
When you look at like your whole body of work, like so far in your life, like if you go back, like, could you have ever predicted that you'd be here? Like, you have, you're doing so many things, and you're helping the youth, and you start a coffee company, and you're coaching. And could you have ever imagined that you got here? And like, what do you think? From within you, like, what do you think allowed for that to happen? To have this kind of growth in your life?
Well, I could have never predicted it because when I was 30 and I was, the unhealthy guy I told you about, smoking a pack a day and drinking way too much and just constantly partying, I couldn't picture myself being 40, right? And then when I shifted my life and went from someone who was very risk adverse and unwilling to try new things and was afraid of failure and all of those things, instead became someone who was like, to hell with it. I don't care if I fail, I'm going for it. And someone who saw the world with the glass half full instead of constantly thinking about where I was going to be, I was where I was now, right? In my mind. And I think that it's not a matter of taking things for granted, but I think we can't take ourselves too seriously either. And I think we have to really love what we do and be very passionate about what we do. And if you have those things, everything else kind of starts to take care of it itself, right? If you're super passionate about something, it will succeed over time. But time is that's the big ticket item. That's what costs the most is
Hmm.
time because it's the hardest thing is to be patient, right? So when I first started doing ultra marathons, I'd come off of mountain biking. I really didn't have very much money at all. I didn't have anything. I was living in a small apartment, renting it from a friend of mine here in Chelsea. And when I transitioned into ultra running, my very first running race ever was the Yukon Arctic Ultra. So I had never done a running race. I'd done tons of adventure races, Eco Challenge qualifiers, Raid the North, and as I mentioned, a lot of mountain bike racing. But when I ran that first ultra, I knew something was different. It was a 100 miler. I won it. I'd never really experienced anything like that before. It was the Yukon in the middle of winter in February. It was very difficult. But my mind was expanded to the possibility in completing that race that human beings underestimate themselves physically, mentally, and emotionally. And that just it didn't apply just to me, that to many of us, we feel that way. But that race proved to me that, in fact, the alternative reality was true as well, that we can exceed any of those limits that we have. And I didn't set out after that race to go to more ultra marathons to try and win more ultra marathons. I set out to learn more about myself and to try and figure out how I did what I did in the Yukon, because I still didn't understand how I did it. Even to this day, I'm not sure how I did it. And in that process of pursuit of wanting to learn more about myself, one thing led to another. I was doing really well at ultras. I met a couple of buddies. We became really good friends. We said, hey, here's a great idea. Let's run across the whole Sahara Desert. So we make this plan to run 7,500 kilometers across the Sahara Desert. 6 degrees of separation. Matt Damon hears about it, gets involved. I'm really condensing the story. And they decide to make a movie called Running the Sahara. And then, fast forward a couple of years, I'm sitting at the Toronto Film Festival. Eddie Vedder is sitting there from Pearl Jam, and Mike McCready did music for the film. Wycliffe, and there's this documentary playing at the Toronto Film Festival, and I'm pinching myself and I'm saying, how's this possible? I think when we live in pursuit of our dreams, things happen, right? And it's just this, it's the same thing with Impossible to Possible. Impossible to Possible came from running the Sahara, because when we finished crossing the Sahara, I couldn't believe that through an adventure, we could learn so much again about ourselves, but about the world. And I thought, wow, it'd be totally legit for like teenagers to be able to go out and experience what we just experienced and go and do the things we just did, obviously on a smaller scale, but be able to go to some amazing places. And so then I said, okay, I'm going to start this thing called Impossible to Possible. And so my wife, Kathy, and my buddy, Bob, and I started this thing and said it would be free. We're volunteers. And we started creating these youth expeditions. And we've
Mhm.
been all 15 of them so far around the world, right? Amazon jungle, Rajasthan, the Arctic, etc. And so again, I know I'm answering your question in a very long way, but it's impossible to answer it any other way. You arrive at a destination and you don't think, I never or rarely look back across my life and say, wow, I did that. No, I did that. And I did that. So I have a website, obviously, and it stays updated, but I'm not focused on the past. I'm not focused on the past. It doesn't define you. What defines you is who you are in the moment, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it was a big question, so I commend
Yeah.
you
Sorry
for
about that long answer.
answering in that way, and and Sahara, running the Sahara, like great documentary and great book, that depicts exactly what you guys set out to do there, and I I encourage anybody who hasn't seen it to watch it, and I loved it. Like, do you think that that event, I know you say you can't go back and say I did this, 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 and this, and the list is very long. We can't talk about all of them, but do you think that that adventure catapulted you into another level of maybe finding a different potential for yourself?
Yeah, and what I mean by that, just to follow up on what I had said before, I you walk into my house, there isn't pictures on the wall or Guinness World Records or any of that stuff. That's all in the filing cabinet, right? Instead, we celebrate at our house what our daughters are doing, right? And I know that I don't want to be reminded constantly, in my own home about something that I've done, but instead appreciate it. I appreciate the things that I've done, but instead I'm focused on what I'm doing now and that I'm happy now and I'm doing the best I can with what I do and where it will lead down the road, right? But I get people have different strategies and different ways of living and achieving the things they want to achieve. Obviously, we have to set goals and prepare for them. I plan for an expedition that's a year and a half away. I'm training now for it. So I am a long term planner that way. But to say a complete thing where in the past would have said, well, for example, to answer your question you just asked, I didn't finish running the Sahara saying to myself, "Well, that's it. I'm gonna be a professional explorer now for the rest of my life." It wasn't like that, right? It was
Yeah.
like, that was incredible, and then one thing led to another, and then I was en route to the South Pole, or I ran, just a bunch of different running expeditions, and stuff like that, and it just one thing led to another. One thing precipitated another because of the passion that I had for what I was doing and how I was living my life, trying to
Yeah.
live my life?
Yeah, totally. And I talk like hearing you speak, I just feel like you know your why, you know? Like you know why you're doing these things and you know what it brings to you and for you, you know? You don't have to spread it all over your house with the medals and awards and all this stuff. Like you don't need those reminders. Those are for you too, you know? It's I think it's a good lesson to share with, you know, you with your kids too and you know, and understand like especially in a world like today with like social media and all that stuff, like it's all about the next thing, the next marathon, the
Yeah,
next big
right.
race. And how much of that is for you or how much of that is for other people? I mean, that's for each individual to understand and decide, but
Exactly,
yeah.
because we all live in an individual reality as well as a global reality, right? So, I mean, there's 2 things happening simultaneously. So, I recently wrote a post, I said, "The greatest challenges that we face in our lives are very personal and relative to us as individuals." So, something that I might think is really hard, like the chemo, for example, was brutal for me. But there was people like, I'm not alone in the cancer clinic getting the chemotherapy. There's people all around getting chemo. And there's a guy I was talking to, and he was in for his second, like it had come back, his cancer had come back, and he was in there. And I said, "Well," I said, "Wow, does it make you feel like garbage?" He said, "No." He said, "No problem. I have no symptoms, nothing." I said, "You're going to walk out of here feeling great." He says, "Yeah." Wow, that is not my experience. And so, in that, though, too, the great things that we achieve, the awesome things that we achieve in our lives are very relative to us as individuals. Has to be meaningful to us first before it can be truly meaningful to anyone else, right?
Yeah. And how do you choose the next thing? You know, your adventures and expeditions are so vast and so big. Like, how do you how do you decide where you're gonna go next and what you're gonna do? And like, is there a timeline for you? Like, how far ahead do you plan? You know?
Well, I go to places that it has to be meaningful to me personally. It has to be some place that I've dreamed about or something that I've really wanted to do? And Um, typically, it's remote, or I mean, some of these expeditions, like when I did the first crossing of the Atacama Desert, north to south, 1,200 kilometers, middle of summer. The data, I did it in 2011. The data and information I was able to get was very minimal. It was really hard to put that trip together, and it was brutally difficult because resupplies were far apart. You're talking 50 to 55 degrees Celsius every day, hole in the ozone. So the sun was brutal, right? The UV rays. And it was an incredibly difficult expedition to plan and train for. And I trained and planned for that for over a year, just for one thing. But that's typical for me too. Like expeditions typically are a year of planning and training, and then I go and I do it. Everything's changes. Like my diet, I adapt my diet for the type of food that's going to be on that expedition, and I adapt to being able to perform with that. And ironically, will normally train myself up even more than I was when I was doing racing ultras or mountain bike racing. I'm trained up more. It's about adversity. It's about being comfortable in adversity because that's what expeditions are, pure adversity. If, I'm going to the desert in the summer, I'm going to the Arctic in the winter. Those are really difficult things for me, especially to do. So, I train for that. Choosing those locations, though, really has to be there's something special that draws me to that place. And I do love being in or places where very few people have ever been, or places at times of year when people very rarely visit or immerse themselves in those environments, because I find that those times are when it's the most extraordinary.
Hmm. And I know you've done expeditions too in the Arctic, up in Nunavut. Also, I worked in Nunavut, and I know this cold. I felt this in you know January, February, where it's windy -60. There's no buildings or trees to hold that wind back, those northern winds. I'm just like really like you can't. They for us they suggested you can't stay outside for more than 5 minutes, otherwise you get frostbite. So then I thought of you. I said, this guy's out there trekking along, hundreds of kilometers. Like, how the heck do you plan for that? How do you stay safe in those extreme conditions, extreme heat or extreme cold? Like,
Well, for starters, dude, I find the cold so brutal. Like, I
yeah.
just oh my god. But, I have a great outerwear partner, as you know, Canada Goose, and they've always helped me. I've collaborated with the design team there to create some amazing gear. A lot of my gear to do my expeditions is custom because that's what works best for the job, right? But I did a project. I've done a lot. We did an unsupported crossing of Kamchatka. As a matter of fact, got stopped short after 20 days unsupported in the mountains of Russia. Crossed Baikal in Siberia, middle of winter, February 2010. 650 kilometers as the crow flies, but closer to 700 on the ground, and dragging sleds, running 50K a day, right? I mean, just crazy stuff, right? But I think the coldest I ever was in January 2020, and to hit home this point also of doing things that we're truly passionate about, the Eastern Arctic. I have a lot of friends. You were up on Baffin. I have a lot of close friends in Baffin Island, in Kikiktarjuak, uh, a small island off the coast of Baffin, and I love seeing them. I love being there. And so it was always my dream to go from the island of Kikiktarjuak, cross the sea ice, keep going across Baffin on the way into Pangnirtung, and do it in January, right? Like, that was always it would be meaningless to anyone else. Everybody else would be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. No, trust me, this is gonna be amazing. And so I decided that I was gonna do this one winter. Oh, dude, it was brutal. It was 2020. The winds, I can't even tell you. The air temperature was -50.
Hmm.
In when I was going up over the highest point on Baffin, the sea ice was bad enough, but I could average about 50K a day pulling my sled, all my gear, all my supplies. I went light, but I knew that I was going to try and do this in 5 days, 220-ish kilometers in 5 days. And so that's how much time I gave it. It ended up taking me 4.5 days. But I froze on that trip. My eyelids, the wind was so strong, it was blowing through the holes in my goggles, the air holes in my goggles, and my eyelids frostbit. Like,
Oh
it was
yeah.
insane. My whole face was swollen. I was a mess, and I did everything to plan around that. I've posted some photos over at different times of my entire, like, I was wrapped up completely, and it was all just a chunk of frost, right? But anyhow, I got it done. But that cold is so brutal. Anyhow, there you
Yeah. I
go.
mean, and you must have
The
tons
heat,
of.
though, can be just as bad. So
Yeah.
in 2021, I've done some projects in Death Valley, and I was retracing with a buddy of mine. We were retracing our 2011. In August 2011, we did a complete north to south crossing of the Mojave Desert through Death Valley. It's epic. And 250 kilometers, basically, right? And we went back in 2021. So let's retrace it. Let's do our route again and see if we can clean up our nav and all that stuff. I mean, dude, honestly, it's some of the most at that time of the year, the most brutal terrain on earth at that
Hmm.
time of year, right? Because the heat just we were 100K into it, and we knew something was like completely off. We were drinking 10 liters each every 20K and processing it. Like,
Hmm.
run that number through your head. That's an insane amount of fluid, right?
Yeah.
But we were processing it through, but our bodies weren't cooling anymore. Tapped out, and it turned. We just thought, we're gonna die. And we tapped out, and it was the hottest recorded temperature. I want to get this right, but I'm hottest 24-hour recorded temperature on the planet ever. It was
Wow.
ridiculous. It was like 134 Fahrenheit measured at Furnace Creek. And so it's both ends of the extremes. But the crazy thing was, we didn't know that was happening. It just was happening because we were out there in the middle of nowhere. But we still somewhat normalized it in our minds because we're like, well, it's just really hot. We prepared for this. We know what we're right. So the psychological aspect of preparing for these things is the biggest thing, you know,
Yeah. And
even though we tapped out.
how do you know when enough's enough? You know,
Well,
when
I just knew my fingernails, dude, were on fire. Like it was like if you ever reached into the oven to grab a pizza out of the oven and you don't have a like a cooking mitt on, and that feeling of the
yeah.
heat on your fingernails,
Yeah.
that's what it felt like. And I've crossed a lot of hot deserts, like the Namib Desert, almost 2,000 kilometers from South Africa to Angola, middle of summer. There was times in that crossing where I thought, well, this is where I'm gonna die, but you make it through, right? You just kind of know you can kind of make it through. But this was like, no, we're gonna die. You just like it was like dying, So
Jeez. Was that the closest call you think in
no,
all
I've had lots of close calls. I've broken through rivers in the Arctic. Rivers. I broke through a river in the Arctic once on an expedition and almost got washed underneath the ice. That was terrifying. And I got out literally at the last minute and was completely covered in, water. Luckily, I had my emergency suit. I had a down suit with me in my sled. My teammate Stefano from Italy was with me. I had gone through, and I was able to get myself out of this hole. It's a much longer story, and rolled in the snow. It's minus 30 out, and put on my, to get all the moisture off. Got all my wet stuff off. Got my down suit on, and walked for 2 days, dude, till I get a point of pickup. Like it was like hypothermic. I just a mess. A
yeah.
disaster. All my toes all blistered and, all the skin came off my toes. They were all frostbitten from my wet boots. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
bad.
Does
Yeah.
that do those close calls make you reconsider or rethink how you plan these things or where you might go in the future, with the
Well,
family and the kids and
you know what it
stuff?
does? Yeah, it's a really good question. I've done 34 expeditions, major expeditions since 2007, and I've had 3 go completely sideways, right? And that's a pretty good average. Um, I will say this, it keeps you humble. And it makes you realize that you haven't got shit figured out, right? You're always learning. And so anything that's gone wrong, I've never been afraid to write about it or say to people, I'm not moving the friggin' goalposts. Like, this is what happened. And it is not what I set out to do. And here's why it didn't work out. And I think by putting that out there, we're able to learn from the things that don't go right. I'm always apprehensive to use the word fail because it was a friend of mine, Chris, who corrected me one time. And it was an acronym he learned from someone else. And he said, well, Ray, there's no fail. It was only the first attempt at learning. And I thought, wow, that's so great. Right. So I would say that these setbacks help me appreciate things more that I have in my life back at home, family, friends, etc. These close calls, if you will. But also they teach me, okay, here's why things happen. Even though sometimes it's not predictable, mistakes that happen. Here's maybe what I could do next time to help mitigate potentially this problem ever happening again.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's really important too. What you said there about failure and being able to identify the learnings around it, because I think I just read something before talking to you. Like it's like one of those lines where it's saying that you don't learn something from winning. You learn something from losing. And how to move forward and what went wrong and how you can
You know what? It's
identify
That's
things
such
to
a good
improve.
point. When
Yeah.
I was racing ultras, I started getting cocky because I thought I was, Mr. Figured it out, and I really loved the desert races. Those were the things like, I'd done MDS a few times and all this jazz. And I entered Badwater Ultra Marathon, and I thought, well, easy. I'm used to running in the sand. I got this. Wasn't really prepared as well as I could have been. I had the best crew you could have asked for, like Marshall Ulrich, who look him up for the listeners that haven't heard of him. I mean, the dude is literally a legend in ultra running. He's a really good friend of mine, and he helped us with Impossible to Possible a lot. Marshall's, just to give you an idea, he's finished Badwater 20 times. Like you
Oof.
heard that number right, 20 times, right? I mean, the guys, Outside Magazine called him the Endurance King at one point. I mean, so anyhow, I had Marshall's crew who helped me, for Badwater. and I completely imploded at about the 40-mile mark, flat on my back, out of the race, a complete mess, right? And it hit me, and I'll never forget me laying on the pavement, half passed out, thinking, I don't know shit. I don't know anything. What was I thinking? It was the best thing that ever happened to me because I came home from that. It humbled me. It taught me not to think I had everything all figured out. And I went on to, with humility, approach my next. I had 3 races before we would run across the Sahara. I won all 3 of them, the next 3 races. And I won those because of what happened in Badwater.
Mhm.
Like I was able to just come back from that and learn from it. So, as you said, it doesn't seem like it at the time, but the greatest lessons we get come from the most difficult challenges from, something like that. Defeat sometimes is the best thing that can happen.
Right. I mean, I can say that, a lot of people listening to you might not be able to relate to like the expeditions that you do because they're unique. Not many people can go out to do that, but they run ultras or they run marathons or half marathons or whatever. So, uh, as part of your planning, are there any things that you can always translate to like lesser distances, like from how you prepare for a big expedition? Is there lessons from that you can also apply to lesser distances or other sports?
Oh, absolutely. I think the key is, I have a friend who just, Yannick Fournier, he just finished. Do you know Yannick? Do you know
I
him from
think I've heard
Bromont?
the name before, yeah.
Really nice guy. He just finished that race that's going on in the UK right now, 100K race. And he called me. I help him with his training, and he was at about goodness gracious, he was halfway, 50K. Called me on his phone. He's like, dude, it is brutal. It's insane. He said, I tripped twice. I fell. I've injured my ribs. He said, I thought about pulling the plug, but he said, I'm still going, and he said, you know what though? What's really interesting is, and I think, sorry, he may have been yeah, it was time wise. Time wise, he said, this is the longest I've ever spent on my feet, ever. And I said, dude, you've already won. Like you've already PB'd in a certain aspect of your running. I think what's critical, and by the way, he goes on to finish it, right? Called me today. He's totally stoked. He's beat up, but he's stoked. And I think that the lesson there is that you have to appreciate as you're training and preparing for anything, whether it's your first 5K or you're going to run a 50K or you're going to run 500 miles. The key is to appreciate those smaller gains that you get and the smaller achievements that you have because they all add up in the long run. Instead of only thinking about the big, audacious, crazy achievement one at a time, you got to think of the small things. Um, when we first started working together in November of, so it would be a year this November. So what would that be? November 21. Um, we were looking at where he was at and how none of his races had gone well that year for him. And I said, you know what you need to do? You need to start breathing and relaxing. You need to get comfortable running. You need to be comfortable with yourself and you need to run and not be stressed. So I want you to start breathing through your nose. And the pace that you're going to run is how you can breathe. And I said, if you can only walk, well, then that's what you do right now. And that's all we're going to do for the next month. You're crazy. He said, you're
Mhm.
crazy. There's no way. I mean, this is a guy who's used to running 200 kilometers a week or whatever. I said, no, it's completely irrelevant right now. We have to get you back to a basic platform, to a point where you have something to build on, like, and so that small achievement within a month, he was running, again, ridiculous speeds as he always does, but breathing through his nose. And
Mm.
then when we said, okay, now let's start doing some other things. After having that small achievement, the greater achievements came, and then he was able to accept that. And then his races started going really well for him. And we all have setbacks, but it's not about winning. It's about achieving the goal that you set out for yourself,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So somebody asked me once, what did it feel like to reach the Red Sea after? crossing the Sahara, and I said, "I'm gonna tell you, it felt exactly like the first run I did." So when I was racing mountain bikes, I was super fit, but we never ran. You would never run when you're racing mountain in those days. And so when I entered the Yukon Arctic Ultra, I had a buddy of mine who was a very experienced ultra runner who helped me to prepare. And I remember one day we went out and I did a run, and it was 7 kilometers from where I was living in Chelsea back to, it was a loop. And for the first time, because my legs would get achy when I first started running, even though my legs were super strong from mountain biking, they would get achy when I would run, and I would take little walk breaks or whatever. And I ran every step. And that feeling of leaving my door and coming back to my door and running every step, that sense of accomplishment was so huge for me. It was exactly how I felt. So when the person said, "How did it feel when you reached the Red Sea?" I said, "It felt exactly like the day I first ran 7K without stopping." It's relative. So the goals have to be relative to us each as individuals, and we have to be able to celebrate those when they happen, but also always have an eye towards how can we improve.
Yeah, that's amazing stuff for sure. And I'm sure it's even difficult to, when you're training accomplished athletes too, who have the experience, who have, success in the past, and then, they go through those stretches where it's not going so well. It's like a lot of it's in their head, and you got to switch it up too, and get them to see the big picture, which I'm sure you're helping them do. Um, the terrain in which you train, you do a lot of your training near your home,
Mhm.
um, some people think, I got to go to X location to train for this event and stuff like that. But you've proved that that's, I'm sure you do some of that, but that's not the case. You can train in your own backyard. So what do you think like the recipe is there for simulating what you're going to be facing when you get on a plane and go to a new location?
Well, uh, let me say this again too, because it's fresh in my mind. So I'm talking to Yannick today at the end of his race, and he's like, "Oh my god, my ribs are killing me. I feel like I've been beat with a bag of hammers," right? Like, I mean, he's just a disaster. I said, "You know what the flip side is?" I said, "Yannick, you know what the good news is? This massive effort that you just did to your body's not going to forget this. It's going to grow from it. It'll never forget. You do something like that once, like your first ultra that you ran, you thought, "There's no way." Maybe you thought, "There's no way I'm getting to the finish line." You get to the finish line, and then 3 ultras later, you're like, "Yeah, I can run an ultra. Want me to do one this weekend? I'll go and do it." So a big part of it, and people laugh when I say this, but it's 90% mental. The other 10% is all in your head. You get to this point where you can mentally adapt and get yourself forward through experience of doing. So I've done these things. So when I'm going to my next super hot desert, I know what it feels like to be in suffocating heat. Now, I have a sauna in our backyard. I train, I sit in the sauna every day. I do the best I can training at home, but I still do training trips for sure. Look at if I was Jim Walmsley, you know, I get it. You're going after UTMB. You're gonna be living in those mountains and running it for months in advance because it's so sports specific. Like you've heard of sports specificity.
Mhm.
Train specifically for the things that you want to do really well at. Um, because of the places I'm going and the remoteness and they involve navigation and potentially a helicopter drop or whatever, um, the means and resources to go to a place first most times is cost prohibitive also, right? So I try to replicate as best I can at home the type of stress that my body will be under. Nothing replicates being in the place that you're going to be in. So, like Jim Walmsley running at UTMB, or anyone that has the opportunity, as you build up through anything. Let's say your goal is just to complete the UTMB. Well, if
Mhm.
you have a chance to go to those mountains on a trip to France at some point before and sort of know what you're getting into, it betters your odds, right, of being able to finish it because you've immersed yourself in the environment. But here, when I'm training for the things that I'm doing, I train for adversity. So my training programs are not designed around for me 200-meter repeats with 100-meter break and da 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 da. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about things like, okay, these 3 hours on Saturday, I'm going to get as much elevation or vertical as I can, but I'm not going to walk any of it. It has to be vertical that I can run. So I'm going to get as much distance with that vertical. but I'm not walking at all. And so now I've limited myself, right? There's a time, distance, elevation, speed factor because of the way that I've created the workout for myself. That's just one example of other, and I this pervades every other form of training that I do, whether I'm on the mountain bike or strength training or I'm in the sauna. It's about adapting to a tremendous load of stress that my body will be on in an expedition.
Hmm. I see that you have a big willingness to share, to support, also, and I always appreciate like talking to you because you always have so much good advice. And w- I know through impossible to possible, you're able to do that, and you're able to see the future through this, through sport, through expeditions. What's your hope for those kids and for the future, and like what's the end goal there?
Well, I think with our Impossible Possible, our goal has always been, and I think we've had close to 70 kids that have gone on expeditions, but they've reached tens of thousands of students because their expeditions, as you know, are combined with an educational program, and the whole thing is broadcast into schools through satellite and a live website. So you can have an expedition with 4 or 5 youth ambassadors in the Amazon jungle or in the Tunisian Sahara, but there's 50,000 students on the other end watching the website, right? So we're trying to connect through kids. A big part of it is to create an appreciation, obviously, for the world. And what I mean by that is not just environmental, but cultural, connectivity, all of these things that it means to be a human being on this planet in this time. And so we are hoping that we are creating future leaders, people that will, in whatever they're doing, and wherever they come from, whatever their background, that in their various aspects of lives that they go on to lead in a way that is appreciative of the planet that we live on, but also with an eye towards what it means to be human. Because I think within every human being is this desire to explore and be an adventurer, right? And so it makes you appreciate the world more, right? As a whole. And so that's our goal with these kids.
Totally, yeah. And I can say like I live in Switzerland now, so I'm definitely tempted to explore a lot more when you
Yeah,
when you,
I
when
guess
you
so.
see those Alps and stuff, and definitely want to get in more trails and whatnot. And yeah, I love what you're doing with Impossible Possible. I think I mean, if I had the chance when I was a kid to do something like that, it's amazing, and it's something that when you're kids, you remember those things and those memories, and being able to share it with schools and stuff as an educational tool. I think that's really special as well.
Well, and we've this next youth expedition, we have a diverse group of young people coming from, um, the U.S., from Quebec, from Nunavut, from BC. I mean, it's going to be so cool because these kids are like four corners, right? And they're coming together and they're going to do this thing together. So that, and just that in itself, they end up connecting with so many more people,
Yeah.
and through what they get out of it. And so, yeah, totally
What
stoked about that as well.
and what do you find, like, what do they ask you when you meet these kids? Like, what do they ask you most about? Kids are curious, and they
Well, the
sometimes they
world,
don't.
what's interesting is they'll ask me about some of these places. Like I've gone back to some of these locations. Like we talked about the Atacama Desert. When I crossed it in 2011, there was nothing out there. I mean, I was in parts of that desert, that I saw the Incan Trail. Like nobody'd seen it for whatever thousands of years because nobody would be out there. The whole area or vast sections of that desert were, owned by mining companies, large mining companies. The land wasn't being mined or developed. It was just, that's who had it, right? And so it was just this big, massive open areas. I've been back to the Atacama and I mountain biked the length of it one year, and not exactly the same route because I was really out in the middle of nowhere when I ran across it, but it's changed. And in the last, since 2011, I've seen so much development in different pockets of the Atacama. Like in different parts of the world that I've been, people were calling before COVID the before times. and the now times is now, right? And I think that for me, the before times were before social media and before this ease of communication around the world where an Instagram post now, do you remember when Instagram first started? If somebody posted a really cool photo, it was like, "Oh my god, that's an amazing quality photograph. You must be a professional photographer." Now everybody's a freaking professional photographer. Like every photo somebody posts is amazing, right? So I think that we think differently, we ingest information differently, right? And I think that the world has changed dramatically since then in many ways. Like, I mean, that's a whole other rabbit hole we can go down. But I think they asked me the most about what was it like, when I went into the Amazon jungle in the early 2000s, or what, have I noticed a change in some parts of the planet? Yeah, I've seen glaciers recede to where they don't exist anymore. I've seen, I've been in parts of the jungles that were dense jungle with vibrant species of life, and those areas of jungle are gone. They've been burned. There's nothing left there
Mm.
for miles and miles, kilometers and kilometers square. So the world has changed a lot. So they asked me the most, what were these places like then? Have you seen these places again? And what do they look like now?
Mhm. Does that make you think any differently about, like, climate change and, like, how we can improve, what we do every day, or how we go about things to try and slow down that, what like the damage we're doing?
Well, no, because I mean, everybody had well, yes. I mean, listen, yes, in the sense that climate change is happening, and the world is changing, and we're at a point where adaptation in our lifetime. I mean, we're adapting. Look at the frequency of storms, and all of the things that are happening right now. And for sure, I worry about the future for my kids, ranging from environment to geopolitical and everything else and beyond. But I see in young people nowadays, and here comes that double-edged sword of social media. I see young people that are doing so much shit at 20 years of age. When I was 20, dude, I was a basket case. I was a disaster. Most of my friends who were 20 were a disaster at the time. 20-year-olds, I can't believe what they're doing. Like, people are accomplishing so many things. So I think we have a generation of youth that are brilliant. And I'm not trying to unload everything on the future, on our future generations, but I'm very hopeful in our greatest resource, which is youth, right? So I tend to lean more on the glass half full. I think things have a way of sorting themselves out with a lot of effort put behind it,
Mhm.
And so I think that humanity is everybody's, we are waking up to the things that need remedy, I think. And so only the future is going to hold for us. I look at, yeah, it's sad to see glaciers receding at such a rapid rate, but this is it's great to be sad. Now let's do something about it, right? And so this is, I'm trying to contribute as best I can with Impossible to Possible and giving youth an opportunity to see the world and be immersed in it. But we all have the ability to do something, you know?
Yeah. And it's we got to do the best we can. It takes everybody to do those things and to make a positive impact, and certainly, like, educating the youth about these things and is going to help for sure, and that's a big part of it. I think about you, and, like, when you got into sport, like, a little bit later, and you broke some pretty big tough habits, and I think about people who are older in age, who maybe are set in their ways, and they don't know how to get healthy, or they don't know where to go or how to get started. Can you share anything? I know it's been a while since you've been at that place, but I'm sure you remember, like, how do
Oh,
you
dude,
how can you
listen,
help,
I'm gonna
like,
tell you,
yeah.
yeah, Justin, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk right over you there. You know what, I'm gonna tell you, and because when you said that, it came to my mind right away. Um, it's funny how things happen in life, and then it'll perk up again at a different part in your life. But I remember getting an email from someone once saying, "Listen, I follow you on all your social media stuff, and I love it, and I would like to go and do some adventures someday, but I mean, my first goal is to run a 5 kilometer. You know, it was a local 5 kilometer road race. And they said, but I have no idea. I don't even own a pair of running shoes. I don't even know how to get started. I have no clue how to get started. And I said, well, can I give you some advice? Basically, back and forth on Messenger. Yeah, please. And I said, well, tomorrow morning you start and you get off the couch and you put on your feet, whatever you have, and you walk out your front door and you go to the end of your lane and then you turn around and you come back in the house and you take your shoes off and then you sit back down on the couch. You don't do any more than that. And the day after that, you get up, you do the same thing, and maybe you go a little further. You go 2 houses down, you turn around, you come back, and so on and so forth to the point that you can walk to your nearest running shoe store or whatever to get yourself a pair of shoes, and then throw away those shoes that you started out with and now walk back in your running shoes because now you're someone with a set of goals and a plan because sequentially you've done something every day. You're not going to build Rome in a day. And dude, when I would go through chemo, I'm used to someone who can go out and run 30, 40K, right? And I would come home after chemo and 2 days of chemo. I would get up the next morning. I would be so sick, dude. Like I just couldn't do anything. And I would spend 2 or 3 days laying around, looking at my phone. And then after the nausea would start to go away, I'd say to myself, okay, today I'm going for a walk. And I would go out my door and I would do the same thing that I told that person. And we live on a road that's about 500 meters long, dead end. And I said, okay, that's my goal. I'm walking to the end of the road. I'm coming back. And then I know I've done something. And I would come home and I would rest. The next day I would get up and then we have another Cirque des Zahab. It's another road. It's about a kilometer. All right, I'm going to go on big hill. I'm going to go walk that. Dude, I can't tell you how stoked I was when I would get out and walk that kilometer because I felt like I could do it. And I knew in my mind, I did 500 meters yesterday. I did a kilometer today. I'll do a kilometer and a half tomorrow. By the weekend, I'm going to run a kilometer. By the middle of the next week, I'll do 5K run on the trails. By the end of 2 weeks, I'll be doing 10K runs. And that was about where I peaked out in between the chemo. I'll do 10K trail run and I will get that shit done.
Mhm.
And it built on one another. Right? Rome not built in a day, one step at a time, and celebrate those small goals. Like I said earlier in our conversation, and be
Mhm.
willing to appreciate that small goal is as valid as the bigger achievements that'll come later on. You know?
And check the ego at the door, right? Like it's
Yeah.
like like fitness is so relative, right? It's where it's like when we go off effort base, that for you is challenging in the moment, and but the former the you before that it was no big deal. I mean, you're used to doing, you know,
Yeah, because you adapt to it, right? But in the same way that that person who had no clue how to get started, all you need to do is take the first step,
right?
right? And it sounds so corny to say, but it's absolute truth.
Yeah. What would you say is like movement has brought to your life? I know, you have all these accolades and these lists of accomplishments, but how do you think it's impacted you?
Well, I think for certain running, I've said this many times before, but running, not today, but I mean in the past, running has been and is my greatest teacher because it's taken me around the world and taught me things about myself that I would have otherwise never known. So running has been much more than just a physical health improvement for me. But I also believe, and I've had people message me and say, I can't believe you got cancer. You're such a healthy guy. How does that happen? And I said, well, you know what? Could have been a lot worse, maybe. Who knows? Glad I'm so healthy, right? So, I running and movement and exploration and adventure and ultras and mountain biking and all these things I do have brought me not only a sense of purpose but a sense of passion, and it's pervades every other part of my life, right? It's in every other part of my life is invested in that movement. So like I said earlier at the beginning of our conversation, if you find something that you're passionate about, that you truly love in your life, and it becomes your focus or primary mover in your life, then you've won the lottery. I mean, what else do you want? You know?
Yeah. and health and family, and you have
Mhm.
both those things now
Absolutely.
too. So yeah, blessed that you're okay and you can keep on moving forward. How can we keep track of you, Ray? Where can people find out about your expeditions and all about you?
Well, ironically, we were talking about the socials earlier, probably on social media. I mean, I'm on, Instagram and Facebook, and I have a website, raisahab.com, which gets occasionally updated. People don't seem to use websites anymore. Probably the easiest thing. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. A lot of people like to use LinkedIn nowadays. Probably social media is the easiest way
Okay,
to reach
great.
out.
Well, thank you so much, Ray. Like, I love talking to you, man. Like, you're so inspirational, and it's amazing where you've come and where you're going, and following along on your adventures and your kids now. We might be looking at some future Olympians there. I'm not sure, but I always love talking to you, and I hope everyone appreciated this chat as much as I do.
Thanks, Justin. It was great being here with you again. I can't wait to finally we gotta get out on a run together.
Well,
So,
I'm back in
we gotta
Canada
make
now,
that
so
happen.
maybe
Hey,
now's
and I
just.
might be coming to Switzerland, so we'll see.
Oh, amazing! Yeah,
I'll keep you in
definitely.
the
Yeah,
loop.
drop me a line.
Yeah.
Take care, Ray.
Thanks, man.